Hello and welcome to this live stream from the 7th Global IAE Energy Efficiency Conference here in Sonderburg. My name is David Hunt. I'm CEO and founder of Hyperion Cleantech Group and the host of the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. I'm delighted to have joining me today for this session on energy efficient construction sites, Domenico Traverso and Arvea Marieni. Domenico is president of Danfoss Power Solutions, Incubation and Editron. He's driving electrification and innovation in those organizations. He's also the host of the Leadership Challenge podcast. Arvea is a partner and board member of the management advisory company Brainscapital and serves as technical director for the Regenerative Society Foundation, co-chaired by US economist Jeffrey Sachs and Italian entrepreneur Andrea Illy. In addition to this, she's also a European Commission expert and a consultant with UNFCCC. So for context today, a little bit about construction. Across the value chain, global construction is responsible for approximately 25% of global emissions, with that figure being 13% purely in Europe. Mobile machinery in particular and stationary industrial equipment alone produce 400 megatons of CO2 per year. As it stands, energy consumption represents the largest part of the carbon footprint from fuel-based machinery, such as excavators and wheel loaders, which are amongst the most energy-intensive pieces of construction equipment you'll see. If left unaddressed, the construction industry's carbon emissions are expected to increase over the next coming decades as we seek to address the needs of a growing population, urbanization, and the rapid growth of cities. So much so, it's actually estimated that in the next 40 years, over 230 billion square foot of construction sites will take place, the equivalent of a new city the size of Paris every single week. With countries, cities and companies setting targets for reaching net zero by 2050 or sooner, the demand for electric and hybrid construction machinery, among other construction solutions, is growing. Let's explore how governments, municipalities, companies can address these issues and how to take advantage of these opportunities. Welcome both.
Thank you.
If we can start with just a few comments on the construction industry and why you feel it may have been slower than some to adopt decarbonisation.
Yeah, sure. The construction industry itself is a very particular case because the equipment that usually are big, large, they require a big amount of energy. Today they are powered by diesel in general, and they're quite inefficient as equipment, but that's the best we could do so far in the years. Transforming those machinery into electric or zero emission is extremely complex because it requires a big amount of energy, which means also enormous batteries in a way. So you need to work in step, and first you need to make it super efficient, which then can allow you to use maybe smaller batteries, and also requires a very large investment, both from the producer of the machine, because to develop the vehicles, but also from the buyer of those machines, because those machines are going to be more expensive, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So it is a complex problem. In some way, it is more complex than the cars that we see every day, or motorbikes and so on. It's very big equipment.
For sure, and we'll touch back on that. Arvea, what are your thoughts?
That the construction industry as a whole is probably a very interesting case of transforming value perceptions as well across the industry in Europe, because it's very dispersed. There are small and medium-sized companies in the construction per se, like the ones operating in our cities. And that makes it difficult for them to acquire the level of efficiency that integrating like process efficiencies and models which are useful and very usual, for instance, in industry sectors, and embedding them in their operating models. And then there is, he mentioned the cost issue for the innovation side, for the premium price for innovation, which is something we're starting tackling at global level, but in Europe in particular. Because you also have to consider that there is like the total cost of ownership and maintenance, integrating life cycle, for instance, for those machines. And you will see that if you have a higher entry value cost, I would say, at the end of the day, you will make savings over the
But I guess that's one of the challenges of getting that message across, isn't it? That there is an initial upside cost, but the longer term, there's benefits. So if we move back to that then, so in terms of construction equipment, there are challenges, both technology, which we talked about, but also around scaling. Perhaps you could share a little bit more on that.
There is, and we also need to say that just connecting what Arvea was saying, as a matter of fact, when you buy a diesel full construction machine, you buy the machine and that's it. But you don't pay the cost of the environment, the cost of what you create in the environment.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an unfair competition with the electric machine, which actually really has, if they have zero impact, it's zero impact at the end. Really, is not a polluting and so on. So that's one point that often is miswatched, is not considered. But yes, there are technology challenge, and yet those equipment at the end. They are hard to make, and they need to make that at scale. Yeah. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. If we would have large volumes or a big demand of those, like electric excavator, those large machinery and so on, which are the one more polluting, then of course the scaling will be much faster, and then we would have more in the market, and probably the cost will be lower. Still higher than the normal full combustion, but still much lower than today. Sure. So at the moment we are in this transition. And we see a increase in demand for sure. Yeah. There is the demand is growing a lot, but still the number of real electric vehicles or electric equipment compared to the number of diesel fuel is still minimal, especially on those super large machines.
Yeah, how can we address that? Because it's in the consumer market, of course, you have early adopters we talked about before, 10-15% of people will pay extra for it because they want to personally. Yeah. But we're talking about business to business here, or construction sites where people are notoriously watching every penny. So how can we address that situation, do you think?
There are several ways. One is policy, which is one of the things that is being repeated today during this conference. And addressing from a policy perspective means, for instance, in concrete cases, to do what the European Commission is doing with procurement, with public procurement. That's why, because public procurement represents about 14% of GDP at the European level. Obviously, not all this goes into infrastructure and construction, but if you put together infrastructure, which is a much bigger part of the pie, like share of the pie, you will have big numbers. And the Commission has put together procurers, public procurers and companies, so manufacturers, to specify for tenders, for public tenders, what that is really needed. Yeah. And you've got the early adopters, although it is not a member of the European Union. Norway, Oslo, for instance, is aiming to, and is on track, actually, to have 100% zero-emission construction sites by 2025.
Okay.
And they already have, they started 3 years ago with pilot projects on 3 different, together with other cities, Copenhagen, Berlin is joining, Seville, all across Europe. The Netherlands are in. They started with pilot projects on circular construction, zero emission, and heavy duty machines. Yeah. And they created the demand, and they are seeing that prices are rapidly going down, that you co-create the tenders, and you also give incentives in several different ways for the adoption.
Yeah.
And the quality of everything, health effects, everything is improving.
It's a knock-on effect. I think construction is very inefficient in many ways, not just in terms of the equipment, and that's something I know that you're very passionate about. But if we jump back to technology for a moment, Domenico, I haven't had a chance to go yet, but down the road there's a construction site with a number of machines there which are electrified. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about just what is feasible, what kind of equipment is actually available today?
Yeah, in the construction site, you can see electric equipment, that you see wheel loader, electric wheel loader are those gigantic machines, really, and which are available today, or is possible to make it full electric. We have our Danfoss one made full electric, but actually we make it as a demonstration. Of course, we can make it for customers. As I say, really, the limitation is the scaling point, but as a matter of fact, it is already possible. We have Excavator also. That Excavator is probably the most polluting large equipment in the world. Is also one of the most used equipment in the world. Is everywhere globally. Is the one that you use to dig anything. Basically, when you have a construction site, there are more excavators than anything, any other machinery. If we turn those into electric, there will be a massive benefit. Actually, we can say if we would just turn into electric excavator, which are in the city, only the one in the city, not the one making highways and so on, but the one in the cities, there will be already a huge benefit for the entire world, both in terms of emission and CO2. Yeah. Those machines are visible, so are possible. It's possible to make it. I think if you want to make a step change, you need a regulation. So you need somebody to say, yes, in this area, in this environment, you cannot run with high emission equipment.
We talked about before the scale of the construction and the growth of cities, which is happening over the next decade, which I think is, despite the pandemic, we know that cities are continuing to grow at massive scale. Going back to, I guess, for some of those people who are making the policies, just how inefficient, because we all know internal combustion engines are inherently inefficient, but there's more than that to the equipment we're talking about on construction sites. Just what is the kind of difference, do you think, between an electrified excavator, for example, and a traditional vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, the diesel fuel excavator they have a very, very low efficiency, like 25%. It's very, very, very low. With an electric vehicle, you increase the efficiency by 70%. So it's really the difference is enormous. Yeah. There is a cost matter, but there's also step in between. So, for instance, something that we are doing in Danfoss also, we have a hydraulic system which are digitally controlled, like hydraulic pump digitally controls. Only that device, so that unit in the excavator, for instance, would reduce the full consumption or will increase the energy efficiency by 30%, which means if it's diesel fuel, you will have less fuel consumption, less CO2 emission, and so on. But if it's electric, you will have a longer lasting battery, or you need a smaller battery, which is one of the problems on those large equipment. Yeah. Can you do a battery big enough and so on? Yeah. So there are steps in between. Mm-hmm. But today, I would say that the technology exists to make it all the way. You need to understand what is feasible and what are the regulation requiring. Yeah.
Let's talk about then sunk costs, because as you said, this equipment is hugely expensive, and many contractors or organizations would have already purchased and invested in these equipments. So how is it to perhaps retrofit some of these things? And is that something which you see as, again, an early step before new machinery is perhaps scaling?
Yes, it is possible. I think this is a market that will come in the future. This transforming existing like excavator or wheel loader into electric, because at the end, those equipment are on the market, are ready on the fields, are available. They are extremely expensive. If you can reconvert it into electric, of course, really it will be a way to reuse something you already have, and in a way, really, you will have your circular economy. Yeah. I think to have this on a large scale, again, has to be driven by regulation, because at the moment you put more regulation in certain areas and so on, and you need those equipment to be electric. Yeah. You will have a number of new equipment, but also you will have equipment you will have companies that start as a job to reconvert those kind of equipment.
Yeah. Talking about circular economy, and again, you touched on this with the pilot projects before, because clearly equipment is a large emissions driver on a construction sites. But how else can we look at sort of construction sites to make them more efficient from a sort of I guess more of a circular economy point of view, and what else can and should policy be driving, or what other technologies have you seen?
Talking about technologies, I would say that the impact of digital technologies and how to facilitate integration in the construction industry and to make it like standards also for small operators is very important, for the reasons that I was mentioning: efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And what it says about the inefficiency, I mean, fossil fuels are actually among the most inefficient fuels in terms of 70% of energy globally across different sectors. The internal combustion engine is an example, but this is you can say that approximately with any other sector. So the other thing is system integration, which is allowed through the digital solutions and the sector coupling through algorithms. And I want to go back to one of the technology barriers, because we were discussing this before with him, with Domenico. You also need to expand the grid and to respond to the needs for charging at sites, because we're talking about big machinery and big batteries, and you got operating times that need to be made consistent and compatible with the demands on site. And that means that you need to shift also the way you work, which is, you know, when we're thinking about transformation, you're a turnaround expert or you're a change management expert, you have to look at the problems not from the perspective of what has been done until now. If you think in terms of a vertical system for energy. And the last thing, because again, we are working on all sides, and globally it's not only a pilot. I mean, Denmark can be considered a pilot project in a way of decarbonization and climate neutrality, but Europe is. Yeah. What I wanted to ask you from a very, you were mentioning about the integration of digital. Are you experiencing, because Danfoss is working on different sectors, like climate, are you experiencing also interconnecting and avoiding, walking past working in silos, even among your own sectors, because it's what we need at a European level, industry level as well.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more. I think now more than ever, I think there is like a digital research also across also the segment. I mean, and Danfoss is very diversified as a company. So we go from climate to this, you know, construction components for construction equipment, agriculture equipment, and so on. But still, really, we have all the digital part, which is kind of you know, it can go across, and we have more and more interchange also of competencies or understanding of research and so on. Specifically, then, if you go on the equipment, on the machinery, I think you're still very specialized, of course. But again, really, the competencies are becoming from mechanic to very, very digital. The core of the technology development, both for electric and for the hydraulic efficiency, is through software, basically. So, and this is where you can make a difference. So ultimately, we can see, like, on evolved and energy efficient hydraulic system, the software make a difference. And the same, really, the secret to make excellent electric system or excellent electrification electric solution for construction equipment or agriculture equipment is coming to the software.
Has to be that, doesn't it? And again, we talked before about sort of smart buildings and the evolution of sort of smart buildings, and yet we don't yet really have smart construction. Picking back up on something you mentioned there, sort of in terms of use cases, because again, when we look at electrification, often people talk about, well, where's the infrastructure? Where can we charge this equipment? It's big equipment. How do we get the power there? Not often thinking about the fact that actually, you know, getting fossil fuel to a construction site is not straightforward. You don't drive an excavator to the local petrol station, for example. So what's the situation with the sort of working mechanisms and being able to sort of change the way you work, but enabling power to come to site, and maybe with equipment being quieter as well, changing the hours of construction?
Yeah, I think this is a part of this gradual evolution. Probably also this is one of the obstacles we're having today also in bringing the energy. And that's why I think if you see what is happening in the construction equipment, you can see that the electrification is really starting from the smaller equipment, which they require less energy, and you can charge it quicker, and you know, you have a system. We have seen, I think, some of the first machine to be electrified are those scissor lift platform, which are small, low voltage, and so on. Now you can see, we have seen last year also launches of on large scale of skid steer loader, which are those small, like small excavator that you see like in the construction site, especially in the cities where you have noise and you know, also the pollution part. But with those equipment, then you can still make it on the scale that we are today with the current grid and so on. The point really to go further, to say really the city of Hamburg will be not allowed to use any non-electric construction equipment, then you need to redo the grid. You need to upgrade the grid significantly, because then you need to charge it with our power and so on.
Sure, so go ahead.
Or, for instance, as they are doing in these models, because this is happening really, even for heavier loads, you set containers for battery for splitting the consumption, like the hours worked. So you can recharge on site. Or at the same time, you can also integrate renewables on site as well.
Yeah.
Or at the same time, you can discuss, and you always have to discuss with the local grid operator, with the utility, what is the availability and how can we arrange that? So it is a collaborative approach, which is a part of the way, I mean, again, Denmark, which is building its infrastructure, and has been building its potential, because it all boils down to having the renewable capacity at the moment. You do it, and that's why you can't take it from only one perspective. You need to create the market, at the same time go on with the infrastructure. But I think we will see an acceleration. We will see even, I mean, you were saying today that you're seeing a demand growth, which is very high.
Super high, yes. Very, very high demand. I think all operators in electrification are seeing
being pushed for that.
Yeah, very, very high demand beyond the expectation on this construction, mostly construction equipment, I would say. Yes, this is coming. And also heavy duty trucks. That was also the surprise, I would say.
Which again is quite important to supply the construction sites with all kinds of materials as well as the equipment itself.
Yeah.
Touching back on your point with sort of the SOs or the network or the grid, we all know that it's quite challenging in many parts of Europe to have access to grid capacity when you're putting, for example, in renewable technologies. Is there some kind of policy shift also where we can, going back to the point, if you're building something in a city, you're going to need an electricity supply because it's a building which will need its power supply. So power has to be available. Can it be dictated that the power is there earlier to enable electrified construction rather than waiting until the building's already built and then providing the power later?
I think it is reshaping the way public administration work together, but I certainly can refer to the main infrastructure policies, which are the TEN, which are the energy corridors which are being built in Europe exactly for strengthening the grid, for providing the capability. And this, again, is a question of collaboration, because the interconnections are going to be one of the answers. You need to interconnect the places where renewables are produced, like in the north of Europe or in the south, with the locations where you got demand. That means you have to have the cables, and you have to have underwater cables, or you have to have ultra high voltage or high DC, high VDC cables to get to the place. But what is your experience?
I totally agree. I think it's a challenge. I think it's a little bit like, you know, there are cities where some years ago somebody decided if you want to build a new building, you need to build it with a garage because they don't want to have cars on the road.
Right.
Now there was a regulation, and it worked at the end. At the end, the one that built the building built it with a garage because that was the regulation. Yeah. I think he has to go in the same direction. Yeah. So I think even recently built building, recently I mean in the last 5 years, in many cases they're not ready, for instance, to supply current, not even for electric car. And if we think about, you know, construction equipment, then you need a strong infrastructure.
Yeah. I'd like to sort of talk a little bit more about policy, because that's important given the audience and given why we're here today. But before we do that, a little bit of, I guess, the crystal ball from you, Domenico, in terms of where you see equipment moving, if you pardon the pun, in the next 2 or 3 years. Where do you see sort of the demands, looking at the OEMs that you speak to, looking at the customers you speak to? Where's the demand, and what kind of machine do you anticipate seeing coming to greater sort of prominence in the next couple of years?
Yeah. I think that the short term is still coming with small, medium equipment, and then I think year over year the medium will become more and more heavy. So I think we will have large equipment presented and promoted, electrified. This year we have 2 important exhibitions. We have the Bauma this year as the biggest construction equipment exhibition in the world, and I'm sure there will be a lot of electric, a lot. those equipment will be sold in the next 10 years. So I think they will take time, the large one. But the small one, I think they are starting and they are taking off probably faster than expected.
Yeah.
And those are the low voltage equipment. And I think we have the scissor lift for sure, mini excavator, skid steer loader, those kind of equipment are the one electrifying. And then step by step, more and more medium-sized or small construction equipment.
Important thing you touched on there in terms of this big show, construction equipment show that's coming up. We've seen obviously with the automotive OEMs when they produce a concept or a car and they say we'll make this available, maybe we'll sell one or two, and then they have huge demand, and then they're thinking, oh, now we have to build this stuff. Do you think there's a possibility again when organizations are building one or two vehicles that they can demonstrate or show that there's suddenly people say actually we need this now, and that causes a challenge, of course.
I think there will be I think yes, in a way, especially with low voltage equipment. With the high voltage, I think there will be still a lot of interest. The large equipment also they are very large investment, of course. So maybe they will take a little bit more time to have a full conversion. But I think we will see more and more coming. I think also that the transformation of the low voltage vehicles or the smaller vehicles in the next 5 years, depending how fast it goes and depending how it's incentivized by the at the end really by the cities and by the authorities, it will determine the acceleration in the large equipment. If we will see a takeoff in the cities, also because of noise regulation, just the noise, it will be enough. On just using skid steer loader, those small equipment, if we have more and more cities demanding that, that will cause also the demand of the large excavator. Maybe I can add one thing. The large machinery also, they have a long time from development to launch. So whatever you want to see in 2027, you have to do it now. And that's why I'm saying the next 5 years, maybe you cannot expect really like a boom on large excavator electric that you see, but somebody will be thinking of it, will be doing it, and so on. And depending how is the demand in those next 3-4 years, this will determine how many will be actually built in 2027.
Okay. So go ahead.
I was thinking about a case, Shenzhen, a city in China, which is turning into basically an electric city. They are using buses and lorries for public transportation, and they're completely overhauling, and there is already a high penetration, and you wouldn't have expected the grid to be able to, and this is not, it's not extremely much better than what we have here. The grid to be able to take up that sort of demand. But with the use of intelligence, artificial intelligence, and a centralized system for controlling all the movements around town, which obviously also boils down to the fact that they've got a very different way of governance in China, but not, just from the perspective of what is technologically possible. Allows to, for instance, determine when and how the bus can charge, and you have buses stopping over. You can do the same with because the demand for battery capacity is actually the same for the construction sites, and you have they built huge centers where, for instance, people or the bus or truck drivers will stop over. They will take a bath. They will go to the doctor. They will go and visit the administrator. They will take care of administrative practices, and they are changing the way you live. That is a bit,
I'll just touch on, again, as we run out short on time, I think that's important you touch on there, because you can comment all you like on China in many ways, and we won't go into that. But in terms of making decisions and making things happen, of course, you have the advantage of
and the scalability.
So let's look at, given again our audience, what we know that the technology is there or thereabouts. We need to stimulate demand. So what policies, incentives, carrots or sticks would you like to see in the next couple of years to really make construction sites much more efficient?
For sure.
You are the manufacturer.
Yes, sure. But for sure, some regulation on pollution in the city, I think, will be the first step, and that's. That would be the incentive for construction equipment, also or for customer construction equipment, actually, for the construction companies to use it, to rent, and to do those kind of equipment. And also, I think, especially in this first phase, I say the next 10 years, there's got to be some incentive also to mitigate the higher cost of those equipment. At the end, really, we have seen, we got those also in on the cars, and it helped a lot. I mean, without incentive, I don't know if it would be where we are today. I know many countries now are removing the incentive, but it worked at the beginning. As to start and to give the scale to us, producer of stuff, it helps, of course. So incentive and regulation about how much can you pollute in a city.
I mean, we saw this with solar and renewables in terms of needing the subsidy support to then become the cheapest form of electricity.
And we lost a chance in Europe with photovoltaic because we basically made the political decision in 2010-12 to let it go. It went, and now we're doing the same mistake with the EVs. Are we willing to have cars manufactured in China and us as importers, or do we want to work here?
I think that's an important thing for the audiences. Again, is as you say, there's so much opportunity that comes with these challenges, and we need to really grasp those opportunities through mechanisms that we've just talked about. Again, are there any sort of final thoughts that you've seen or that you would like to see?
Yeah, simply, tenders is you give specifications in which the award you got more points, for instance, assigned if you got low or very extremely low or zero emissions locally. And this is happening, and this is a way to incentivize it. You can also put a price on, carbon market mechanisms and ETS, the extension on transport, which is being discussed now in Parliament.
Yes.
ETS is actually a very important one. It doesn't touch the directive, your segment, your market segment, but it has to come. You're right.
And these air quality regulations, I think, are a good first win because you get consumers on side immediately. You know, we've seen again over years, the London smogs of old, even before my time, but it was that air pollution that changed policy that made us change how we operated and how we sort of heated our homes in cities back then. And again, I think we need to see something similar in terms of how we move around our cities, how we power our cities, how we construct our cities.
You got to incentivize the lower emissions because you cannot think really that from a day to another you get an electric excavator, but you can incentivize the lower emissions. So the lower emission will always win, and then it's already a good start. That will be a good start.
And that's a way you give a price to carbon.
Yeah, exactly.
And carbon is
totally agree.
Yeah, a price for resource usage.
Yeah. I think you touched on a point earlier on, it's about you having to pay the cost, which fossil fuel companies and vehicles don't pay the true cost of their operating. And
it is an unfair competition in a way, yes.
Subsidies.
Yes.
5 trillion based on calculation of International Monetary Fund of World Bank.
Yeah.
So a lot of people would really probably react to that, but that's it.
There's a lot of terminology in terms of subsidies. Suddenly become tax breaks for fossil fuel companies. Well,
they're discussing this. They are discussing this there.
So how again do we stimulate those kind of policies? What are the quick wins? How can we sort of enable what I found often is municipalities or cities and mayors are often the first to take action.
Absolutely.
So is that something where a button we should be pushing?
I think the reaction. Again, the quality of life of people. People are resentful and getting resentful because their health is in danger. And we know, for instance, more and more the NOx or SOx, which diesel.
Absolutely.
Diesel are affecting our health much more than we thought. And we, again, I'm working a lot with China, but one of the reasons why there was a change in environmental legislation is because people took the road and there were protests.
Right.
Because the quality of air in the cities was horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it still is. I mean, my daughter last week was taking part in an activity where they all wore backpacks with air monitors just to see how polluting was to go to schools. And as parents, of course, this is a real thing. I know that governments and policymakers see this, but how do we get them to say this is a now thing? We need to be making these decisions now. And going back to the point, there are solutions that we can implement.
Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right that it comes also from the municipalities, and probably small municipalities can be the ones starting first, because the other one, as we see also here in Denmark, there are many cases where virtual cities really are demanding more higher standard and so on. They need to value. I mean, it's a chain at the end. The municipality need to impose, if you want to build a building, build a road and whatever, you in order to win and to do it, you need to have certain standard and so on. That will force or will incentivize the construction company really to use equipment that are lower emission, and so it's a chain at the end. But we need to start from there. And in my view, yes, the mayor of municipalities can make a difference. Of course, large cities are more complicated, but also they have to do their part. And when we will see more and more large cities also in Europe and in the US demanding those kind of policies, this is where the market also will take off tremendously. And
where do you see funding? Because again, a lot of governments have a net zero 2050 ideals published. So where is the money to support that? Are there mechanisms within the EU or elsewhere where there's ability for municipalities or for organisations to tap into a fund to enable them to make these decisions?
Well, for instance, again, the EU ETS is being redesigned in order for some of the revenues, basically, to be ideally allocated to either innovation or to implementation, or even social justice. And this is one of the messages that Executive Vice President Timmermans was giving the Parliament, was sending to the Parliament yesterday. If you do not consider that the EU ETS is going to fund the climate fund, the European Climate Fund, then our policies might be imbalanced. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think taxes.
Yeah. I agree.
It's the allocation of true cost, isn't it?
Yeah. Integrating externalities, as I was saying.
So with our audience here, what would be perhaps your last thoughts or your last words or last request to those in power in terms of what can we do or what can they do more specifically to enable us to play our part in greening of these construction sites and building more cities?
Yeah, from my side is first of all to raise the awareness, as they can do here, but raise the awareness that construction play a big part in the game, big part. So those large machinery play a big part, and the solution come from at the end the government and the regulation and so on can really will really make a big difference. Because without that it will be difficult. It will come anyway, but it will be much slower. They want to have an acceleration. It starts from there.
Yeah. And a very last word?
The very last word is about competitivity for the European industry, because if we miss it now, we will not make the investments, and maybe we're even late, that we need to compete tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because this is where it is going. We want it or we won't.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, isn't it? Thank you both for your time and for your thoughts, Domenico and Arvea. Thank you very much for those of you who've been watching. I hope that's been useful, and I hope you can see some points there that we all have an opportunity to make this an opportunity as much as it's a challenge. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.